Welcome, Chosen X. You wake into a morning that receives you without bargaining. The light at the window comes like a quiet promise. It does not compel applause or demand explanation. You stand and let your spine remember its name. People who once traced the outline of your limits look up with an expression that pretends surprise, but you do not invite their astonishment into your governance. Today you establish a compact with yourself that is simple and immovable. You will no longer accept arrangements that dull the edges of your joy. You collect the evidence of what has been draining you, unreturned time, borrowed labor, requests that arrive as obligations, and you place each item on a plain surface to be assessed. This is not performance, it is inventory. You perform small domestic acts that function like temple repairs. You change the passwords that granted casual entry into your hours. You set expectations in writing. You decline late, unplanned encounters that have always cost more than they gave. These shifts are not dramatic speeches, they are quiet mechanisms that reroute your energy toward tasks that nourish instead of deplete. When old alarms sound in the body, you answer with two motions. You name the sensation without indulging it, and you do one concrete task that can be finished before the alarm can convince you to act otherwise. Completing the task rewires the reflex that once bowed to panic. You do not pretend danger is absent, you refuse to let fear be the editor of your life. You stop accepting roles that were assigned to you in other people's stories. Relatives who profit from your availability discover a suddenly empty stage. Former friends who preferred spectacle over substance complain that there is no show. You do not supply theatrical contrition. Instead you offer precise accounts, receipts paid, appointments scheduled, documents filed under your name. These mundane acts reclaim the narrative one small victory at a time. Your language becomes leaner. You practice generosity that is directed and deliberate rather than diffuse and exhausting. You ask for help from a short list of people who have proven they can hold a secret and carry an obligation. You set meetings in daylight, allow exits in every plan, and communicate expectations in sentences that do not require translation. Repair shows up as modest proposals. A time that is set and honored, a brief meeting in a public room, a promise accompanied by a visible change. You accept gestures that include follow-through and decline those that only sound like repair. Forgiveness is not a public spectacle, it is a private arrangement grounded in altered behavior. You let plain facts stand without turning them into weapons or shields. If someone insists that your boundaries make you harsh, you listen for whether they are defending a convenience rather than a need. You do not reply with a volley of justifications. Instead you demonstrate steadiness by tending the daily list, food bought, bills organized, calls returned in allotted windows. Night comes and you fold the day into a modest ritual. You place tomorrow's page where your eyes will find it upon waking. You sleep with the window cracked, letting the room agree to an easier temperature. You rise with the knowledge that small acts of care accumulate into a life that does not wobble when tested. You do not pursue celebratory triumph. You pursue reliability and clarity. You understand that dignity is rebuilt in unglamorous habits, a letter mailed, a copy saved, a meeting kept. These are the accretions that restore a name previously borrowed by rumor. You practice restraint that feels like soft armor. When provocation appears, you meet it with a measured response that neither surrenders nor escalates. You choose work that is honest over gestures that are loud. You let gratitude for small help arrive without guilt and refuse to apologize for learning to stand with your own legs. Relationships shift like weather. Some people who once relied on your exhaustion now find the supply closed and must learn to carry their own weight. You do not gloat at that discovery, you continue to offer what you can with discernment. You accept invitations that honor your terms and decline those that do not. You build a short, useful infrastructure for your days. A jar for receipts, a folder for correspondences, a small team of people who will answer a call when prudence demands it. You practice making lists that end and then you finish the lists before adding new items. Each completed list is a proof that steadiness can be manufactured through habit. You place your palm over your chest and say a quiet sentence of thanks for the endurance that carried you here. You do not need ostentation to confirm survival. You acknowledge the cost without turning it into identity. You are not a cautionary tale, you are a person learning how to keep the life entrusted to you. As morning returns, the shape of your day feels simpler. You answer what matters, decline what drains, and allow small pleasures to exist without apology. You walk past a building that once held performances staged at your expense. You do not enter unless the terms respect the person who now occupies your hours. You are not seeking a verdict. You are building a steadiness that is conferred by actions rather than applause. You collect the modest proofs of repair and let them be the record. You sleep again with the window open and wake with the same gentle intent. The work of the day begins anew, and you meet it with a body that remembers how to stand. You keep the quiet work and rise again. Morning has folded into a width of hours and you move through it with a new economy of attention. The rooms you inhabit feel less crowded because you have removed the chairs that invited spectators. You keep a small map of obligations on the table and cross off each one you will not carry again. This crossing off is not a symbol only, it changes the geometry of your day. Old voices that mapped your limits now search for the projection they once relied on, and when they find you whole, they make complaints that sound like memory but lack purchase. You begin to learn the architecture of your edges. Where drainage once occurred, you build modest partitions that hold warmth and prevent seepage. These boundaries are practical devices, not punishments. They are measurements of what you can sustain and what you must refuse. You allow generosity to be intentional rather than indiscriminate by setting brief agreements with the people who matter. A single sentence of clear expectation becomes a shelter against the slow erosion of your resources. There is a phase of naming that feels clerical and holy at once. You list the ways attention was siphoned, the patterns that rewired your habits, the phrases that reduced your days to management of other people's stories. You do this without theatrics. A neat ledger appears, a place where consequences can be tracked and decisions can be measured. The ledger is not vengeance. It is a training manual for the life you mean to steward. You cultivate a handful of steady practices. In the early afternoon you take a brief walk where no one is invited to follow you and quietly breathe. You practice drinking water until the action feels deliberate rather than perfunctory. You hold a weekly window for papers and paychecks and treat it like sacred time. You speak plainly about what you will accept. This plainness reduces room for misinterpretation and invites people who can meet you in straightforward ways. When someone arrives with an old expectation, you refuse the polite acquiescence that once dissolved your boundaries. You answer in short declarative sentences that do not require defense. The person who depended on your ready concession notices the change and tries to bargain with memory. You do not barter who you are for the comfort of their recollection. You repeat the facts and then attend to a different task. Grief continues to visit, and you do not hurry it. You understand that sorrow is part of the garden that grows patience. You mark the differences between grief that asks for attention and the performance that seeks applause. You sit with the weight for enough time to learn from it, then you do a small task. Conversations become instruments of precision. You prefer short plans with clear end times. You schedule a meeting for 30 minutes and uphold this restriction as if it were a piece of your moral architecture. Exit strategies are not humiliations, they are provisions of safety for every participant. Clarity becomes your kindness. You practice accountability that is visible and modest. If you commit to a task, you finish it, or you explain, early and plainly, why you cannot. You make it a rule to sign documents only after reading them, to copy any correspondence that matters, and to keep a paper trail without rancor. The act of keeping records is not distrust, it is the task of a person who desires to live responsibly. You accept help without apology. Assistance that arrives as a bridge is received with gratitude. Saying I accepted the aid is a practice that removes shame from the economy of support and allows future reciprocity to be honest. At times you must refuse requests that wear the guise of necessity. You refuse those that carry the weight of other people's habit rather than urgent need. You learn to distinguish between a true emergency and a pattern of default that asks you to repair other people's systems. Refusal is not cruelty, it is the maintenance of your capacity. The daylight things and private rituals gather momentum. You prepare a meal that is intended to nourish rather than to impress. You light no show, you simply taste and finish. You return messages in the window you promised and put the phone on silent when the hour for work arrives. These small acts wear down the old reflexes. You find that honesty, when practiced repeatedly, becomes a language others can understand without explanation. People begin to orient themselves around your terms. Some adjust, awkwardly at first, then with more ease. Those who cannot meet your new frame naturally begin to fall away. The loss is mourned and then accounted for. At dusk you fold the list of today's accomplishments and set a tiny intention for tomorrow. The hope you carry is not dramatic. It is the steady conviction that better policies toward yourself will, in time, rearrange the landscape of your days. You breathe with a body that has learned new habits anew. You step into the middle of a day that demands clearer sight. The soft routines you built become instruments for discernment and you practice using them like a carpenter tests a new plane. When a familiar pressure arrives disguised as a favor, you stop and examine the shape of the task. You do not assume benevolence. You assume the pattern until it proves otherwise. In that pause you find power because interruption reframes the obligation and reveals its true origin. An old confidant surfaces with an urgent request wrapped in nostalgia. You listen for the part that asks you to shoulder someone else's disorganization. You answer with a precise boundary and offer an alternative that preserves both your safety and their dignity. Sometimes they accept. Sometimes they resent the containment. You allow both outcomes without collapsing into guilt. You are not the container for another person's lifelong bypass of responsibility. During midday a memory knocks like a loose shutter and you feel the old shame stir beneath your ribs. You let the feeling arrive without dressing it up. You describe the sensation to yourself as if describing weather. Naming reduces the shadow's authority. Then you turn to a small task that requires one tidy action and finish it. The action closes a circuit in your body that the shame had opened. You practice the economy of speech. In tense conversations you sharpen sentences down to their functional core. Plain words resist distortion. They do not leave room for the theatrics that once rewired your role. You learn the discipline of briefness because it protects the shape of the moment from elongating into manipulation. There is a moment when you confront someone who invested themselves in your narrative. They have fashioned your past into a lesson about their resilience. You speak your truth without spectacle. The truth you offer is not a weapon but a mapping. You explain what was asked of you, what you endured, and what you will allow going forward. You do not demand recognition. You offer clarity so that mutual navigation can begin or end with dignity. You encounter systems that prefer opacity because it sustains their operation. Bureaucracies and gossip mills both depend upon confusion. You refuse complicity. You read documents with attention, you file copies, and you demand receipts. This insistence is an ethic of stewardship. Paperwork becomes sacrament because it honors the fact that your name and your labor matter. When you accept assistance you do so with conditions that honor reciprocity. You resist the script where receiving obligates you to repay softness with shame. You state the terms allowed and keep them. This practice loosens the knot of indebtedness that once tied you to silent servitude. A person who once thrived on your instability tries to bait you with a public jibe. You answer in a short factual sentence and do not amplify the performance. Their insult loses the currency of drama because you refuse to enter their marketplace. You notice how quickly the energy of spectacle fails without your consent. You make space for repair that is humble. Apologies are paired with visible shifts. Plans for change include checkpoints and external witnesses. You accept the repair that carries accountability and decline contrition offered as a one-act show. You do this without malice. You prefer restoration to revenge and clarity to rumination. Evening arrives with a ledger of small victories. A bill was resolved. A call was returned with a calm voice. You kept the appointment you scheduled instead of yielding to convenience before the need was met. Each resolved item is a stitch in a durable garment that will keep you warm when cold winds return. You teach others how to be in relation with you by how you behave. You model concise invitations and clear exits. People learn the pattern through repetition. Those who are accustomed to extracting energy are the slow learners. They adjust or they fade. The fading is not desertion, it is a natural consequence of choosing a different set of rules. In the quiet between tasks you feel gratitude for the people who have learned to show up. You hold them close with intention and you release those who remain instructive in their absence. The measure of your circles becomes the quality of attention rather than the volume of presence. There is a late-night conversation that tests your new shorelines. A voice asks for access that implies sacrifice. You respond with a question about what would change and what would be sustained. The asker has no plan and you offer a helpful referral instead. You do not accept the old duty because the old duty has always been one-sided. You practice the small liturgies that steady your nerves. A sequence before sleep, water, a small bread, the chair moved back from the table, 2 names you will check in with in the morning. The list anchors you into living practice rather than aspirational rhetoric. Ritual without spectacle retains the dignity of habit. You rest well. You enter a season of building where strategy replaces reaction and steadiness becomes the measure of progress. The work is quieter now, but not less demanding. You design systems that hold your energy without asking you to perform. These systems are small and practical: a labeled folder for correspondences, a calendar that honors your hours, a short list of contacts who know what to do when prudence calls. Each element is a tool that keeps you from defaulting into old patterns. In this phase you practice translating intention into architecture. You do not merely decide to rest, you schedule it. You do not merely commit to speaking plainly, you draft the lines you will use in difficult moments and rehearse them until the words feel like reliable instruments. Preparation reduces the chance that heat will lead you into a habit you had sworn to leave behind. You experiment with tests that reveal intent. When someone proposes a sudden ask, you offer a conditional response that requires them to state how they will contribute to the solution. This method exposes whether a request is mutual or merely a habit that leans on your availability. The tests are not traps, they are clarifying devices that separate reciprocal exchange from one-sided expectation. People who truly value you learn to meet the terms. There is a moral elegance in trimming what does not belong. You let go of social obligations that exist to perform loyalty rather than to cultivate it. Invitations that were once flattering now reveal themselves as drains. You decline politely, and your refusal carries no drama. Voids appear where empty engagements once lived, and you fill those voids with practices that restore your capacity. Your language becomes a field of careful choices. You cultivate a tone that communicates limits without hostility and warmth without overexposure. You compose messages that close the door gently but firmly. You announce boundaries as factual statements, not requests for validation. The clarity of your speech becomes its own protection. Misunderstanding loses its foothold when sentences are plain and expectations are explicit. Repair takes the form of sustained, testable commitments rather than singular declarations. When a former ally apologizes, you ask for a plan that includes small, dated steps. You accept gestures of repair that can be measured and you decline theatrical performances disguised as amends. Restoration requires time, and you reserve the right to see evidence of change before reintegrating someone into your inner rhythm. Financial accountability is part of this structure. You organize your accounts so that obligations are visible and manageable. You set aside emergency funds with the same discipline you use to honor rest. Money becomes an instrument of freedom rather than a lever others can pull to extract your labor. The ritual of checking balances and confirming transactions becomes a quiet act of self-custody. You practice discretion as an active virtue. Not every story needs retelling, not every hurt requires an audience. You keep a private archive of experiences that serve as lessons rather than entertainment. When you do share, you limit the frame and keep the purpose clear, to inform, not to perform. This restraint protects both your privacy and your capacity to be generous without cost. As trust re-enters your sphere, you invite people gradually. You create small shared practices, a weekly check-in, a shared calendar entry, a communal meal where departure times are agreed upon. These rituals build communal reliability. They allow you to test how people behave over ordinary time rather than in crisis. Those who honor the simple agreements become the companions you keep. You continue to refine the gestures that protect your interior life. You close the door on surprise visits and require plans for intimate conversations. You meet in daylight and in public settings until steadiness is evident. You inform one or two trusted persons of your plans so there is accountability without exposure. Prudence is shaped in habit. When anxiety tries to reclaim space, you meet it with two small practices. You describe the sensation in specific terms, and then you do a single act that has a clear finish. Naming lessens the impression of mystery, and finishing a task interrupts the spiral into helplessness. Over time, these micro-practices rewire your response to stress and decrease its power. You cultivate a work ethic that values slow accumulation over theatrical effort. You schedule focus blocks and protect them as if they were appointments with a person you respect. You turn down opportunities that promise quick attention at the expense of long-term craft. Commitments that align with your principles receive your energy, the rest is politely declined. There are moments when old networks attempt to redraw the map of your life. You hold fast to the coordinates you now inhabit and refuse to negotiate away the borders you have installed. People plead with nostalgia, you listen, but your assent is earned, not assumed. This steady refusal is not a punishment to others, it is a preservation of the person you have become. At times you feel the ache of loneliness that accompanies the pruning of ties. You do not mistake solitude for failure. You view it as a clearing in which new growth can occur. You plant small practices of companionship, a phone call with a friend who has shown consistency, an afternoon spent in a community place that does not demand performance. These are careful investments in relational soil. You continue to teach by example. The lives around you begin to shift in response to your new rhythms. Some people learn quickly and offer reciprocal care. Others do not change and quietly exit your pattern. The departures are not losses to be mourned endlessly, they are coordinates adjusted on a map that now reflects honest geography. As dusk arrives, you complete a brief review of the day. You note what worked, what required adjustment, and which relationships asked for more evidence of change. You carry the information forward without letting it become a burden. The practice of review is gentle and practical because it prepares you for the next morning when your resolve will be required again. You build a life whose scaffolding is unglamorous and durable. The measures of success are quieter now: steady friendships, bills paid on time, a body that rests, a garden of small projects that move forward. These are the things that protect joy from being stolen by drama and that return your name to you with integrity intact. You continue to assemble, day by day, the framework that will hold a life worth living. You stand at a bend and notice how the current has changed beneath your feet. What once required a performance now asks only for attention. You carry the intention like a tool and set down what does not belong to you. Days that demanded spectacle now ask for presence, and you meet them with a new economy of care. Faces that consumed your evenings either learn the shape of your hours or they leave the room. Those who remain practice steady kindness rather than showy sympathy. You keep a concise list of commitments. Each fulfilled promise quietly restores your name. A letter arrives from someone who once spoke loudly about your faults and now offers modest repair. You receive it like a plan rather than a plea. You reply with brief terms, daylight conversation, a short agenda, an agreed exit. Restoration here is measured by action, not by words. You shape your work with limits you designed. You schedule focus blocks and protect them. You refuse tasks that make you small. Acceptance depends on reciprocity and clear language. You nurture small rituals to steady your nervous system. In the hour before sunset you prepare simple food and set the table for one. You place a list beside a glass of water and mark items to finish before sleep. Completing it becomes a liturgy proving your capacity. When gossip reaches for your story you decline to feed it. You let plain facts stand because they resist embellishment. Rumor loses appetite when met with tidy information and steady silence. Spectacle collapses without your consent. You minister to your boundaries with practical acts. You hire counsel when law requires care. You store documents where they can be retrieved without panic. Backups become tenderness toward your future self. Counting and arranging are prudent acts, not paranoid ones. Generosity becomes chosen gestures rather than default spending of your energy. You give where reciprocity exists and where your contribution builds something lasting. You refuse to use healing as currency to earn belonging. Loneliness passes through like weather and you receive it without panic. You write a short note to a consistent friend and invite them to walk. You allow company in measured portions and learn that small gatherings refill a tired spirit. You are careful to count the cost and refuse what will hollow you. Your speech grows concise. You practice 3 plain sentences that state limits and nothing more. The economy of words protects time from being swallowed by endless negotiations. Sentences become gates that open and close cleanly. Weeks accumulate small patterns into durable change. Bills are paid on time. Forms are completed. Projects move forward. These acts knit a fabric of steadiness that resists rumor and restores esteem. An old place offers a new role under reworked terms. You read proposals slowly and respond after sleep. You decline quickly when terms demand the old scripts. You accept with care when the plan honors who you are now. Decisions are tested by time, not by impulse. You guard a small circle and teach them how to be. Meetings happen in daylight where exits are visible. You ask for clarity and return it. Trust returns in increments and each increment is recorded in the ledger you keep. The work you build is unglamorous and resilient. A garden of modest projects grows under your hands. Each evening you name 3 completed things and place the note in a box for tomorrow. That archive becomes proof of steady motion. When a past harm returns, you do not perform it for others. You name it privately, learn what the memory asks you to change, and set an action that proves you listened. Pain becomes a lesson that shapes careful choices rather than a spectacle that defines you. At the week's close you cook a simple meal and invite a friend who has shown up. You do not narrate wounds. You share bread and work on a small joint task that produces a visible result. Shared labor is a practice of mutual care that resists theatrics and becomes durable. Later you stand by the open window and watch the city cool. You place a hand on your chest and say 2 words that return your breath. You set tomorrow's list where daylight will find it and sleep with the room slightly open. A brief film gathers these practices into a sequence you can try and repeat. The images teach posture and offer simple exercises. If the film fits your life, consider subscribing so the next installment arrives as a calm reminder. Let notifications be small bells that call you back to practice when focus drifts. Join when the work matches you and decline without guilt if it does not. You wipe the surface, set the kettle aside, and write 1 line naming progress. You fold the day carefully and sleep with the calm knowledge that you are stewarding a life that is honest and durable. Tomorrow is simply the next faithful thing and you will meet it with the tools you have assembled.